Thanks for tuning in to the Football Talk Squadron. I'm Dutch.
And I'm Pops.
Hey, welcome back. A little off season. NFL free agency is underway. Had a lot of big stuff happen the past few days in terms of trades and other things. Before we get into that, I thought it would be like a unique way to do this episode, because not only are we going to be talking about like free agency of what's going on right now and sort of how it affects every team, but just sort of like historically free agency. So my question to you, Pops, and I know this is like a typical it depends answer, is what in your mind separates like, hey, in the off season, this is what good teams do in free agency, and this is why like historically bad teams, what they do in free agency. Do you have any type of like thing that you've always sort of noticed that you just sort of scratch your head and go, man, I don't, every year we see this with the Browns, with the Jags, like with whoever that you want to throw into the boat? I know that's a very open-ended question, a little hard-hitting one to start the episode with, but I figure I'd start it off there.
Yeah, so I go straight to, I'll take Chicago Bears 10 years ago there, Dutch. Dude, Ryan Pace was a terrible GM, and I mean, it ended up him getting fired at the same time that Matt Nagy was, and like the whole city of Chicago was popping champagne, and they were parading through the streets like they won the Super Bowl, because we finally realized that what this guy was doing was just tearing apart the whole entire franchise. And I think for me, that's why Ryan Poles deserves more grace than what he's given. And I get it. You got to win now. Like everybody wants to win now, and that's the mentality going forward. And I told you guys last year, like I felt outside of the offensive line, like he signed who he could sign within his within the cap space, to try to fix the line. And it just did not work out last season, as we saw. And we've seen this year that we've signed 3 new linemen, 2 starters, 1 that's going to be on the bench, probably more than likely. But we've signed decent dudes so far this offseason. So let me break it down. Like, what did Pace do? Well, go back to the Khalil Mack trade. We gave everything and the kitchen sink to get 1 player. And don't get me wrong, like Khalil Mack, fantastic player. Like, when he was playing with the Raiders, like just tearing up. And even the first year with the Bears, he was all pro. I used to fight with you that he was better than Aaron Donald that season. Like, we kept going back and forth, at work about how good of a season Khalil Mack was having. And the problem with that, though, was we gave up so much to give him all the draft capital. We also traded up to get Mitch Trubisky the season prior. Like, there were mistakes that young teams or inexperienced GMs make that the others don't. And what I mean by that is, look at Belichick. Belichick doesn't, like, he sat at the bottom of the draft every single year because he knew deep down inside that the guys that he was going to get out of the draft were not as good as the already established free agents that were out there. Now, let's be honest, free agents are going to cost you possibly a little bit more, than, a 7th rounder or something like that will. But for me, it's the guys who, like the Belichick method is pretty much the example that I'm going for, is that you find that free agent who you might be able to get on a discount and put them in the right system to allow for them to succeed, versus putting all your eggs in the basket of every year. Like we talked about it. Just look at us drafting Caleb Williams last year, number 1 overall. Like we talked about it. What are you doing to make this guy set up for success? And honestly, we didn't fix the offensive line like we expected to. The dude got destroyed. Most sacks in the NFL last year. And, that hindered his progression that hopefully we'll see. If we see a sophomore slump after last season, then I'm giving up on Caleb Williams. But, we saw moments of hope out of the kid, but he just wasn't set up well. The same thing could be said. I mean, Johnny Manziel should have never gone to the Browns. He should have never been drafted that high. But again, another scenario, just you're being drafted. Or Baker Mayfield, perfect example. Baker Mayfield. They thought his failures in Cleveland was the reason why they were losing. When in reality, it was an organizational issue. He gets traded, goes and plays D line for the Carolina Panthers for a season, but then look at what he's doing now with the Buccaneers. Like we all look back now as like, wow, Baker was not the problem. It was Hugh Jackson. It was these other coaches. It was the organization as a whole. Just destroying guys. Setting them up for failure right out the gates.
Let's see if I can sum this up and see if I'm on hitting the nail on the head with what you're summing up. I think what you're really emphasizing, which is I agree with, the more splashier the move, especially in terms of capital, whether it be draft picks or just salary cap percentage, the worse the deal usually is for the
100%.
team. I could not agree more. Like, I think that in terms, what Belichick did was Belichick paid the guys that he knew he couldn't afford to lose, which was Brady and Gronk.
Mm-hmm.
And he would usually try to keep a corner like Sante Samuel. I think about Jamie Collins he kept for a few years before he went to Arizona. Like
Ty
Law, another one brought in, Darrelle Revis for the Super Bowl year. Like he found ways. But then like when Malcolm Butler wanted a bunch of money, he was like, see ya.
See ya, dog.
And he didn't do. I think that may have hurt him in some ways because it sort of started the decline. Like they were letting go some guys and he necessarily wasn't hitting it with the free agents. But I sort of look at what is going on in the NFL present day. Like you have Eagle defensive linemen who are just raking it in via the Cardinals. Sweat's going there, huge deal with him. You have Milton who's going to the Patriots for a large size. And I sit back and they're paying these guys, and this is sort of like what I get to with like the splashier moves. They're paying these guys like the superstars. You're giving an Aaron Donald contract to someone who really has never been Aaron Donald. He's good. Don't get me wrong; these guys played very well. They won them a Super Bowl last year. But at no point have I sat back and been like, "Yo, Josh Sweat is Aaron Donald." Like that's the dude that if I'm gonna pay up, that's the guy. Now on the other side of the coin, it's like the Browns. You sunk all your money into two players, Deshaun Watson
and Myles
Garrett. And I go back to your like Bears point. As good as Khalil Mack was, which I get it, we got into some arguments. Khalil Mack was, and it wasn't anymore. It wasn't that Khalil Mack wasn't good. Khalil Mack during that season was an absolute monster. But as good as he is, it's almost like taking what we talk about every year with the draft. Like it's the reason the quarterback goes the first overall pick. Why? Because he touches the ball every single play when the offense has it. A defensive guy, it's like, man, I get it. He can have this huge impact on the game, but at the end of the day, he's just one guy. Mm-hmm. And when you lock up all that capital, you think about the Browns, and it's like, it's hard enough to try to get somebody to go to the Browns. Like, no one wants to go to Cleveland unless it's for a ton of money. And now you don't have that anymore. So it's why you're stuck in this like cycle of, hey, we have some really, it's sort of like the Lions. They had Megatron, they had Stafford, they had some guys, but it was like, I remember, I forget, what was that defensive lineman's name?
Ndamukong Suh?
No. And sorry, he went to like Seattle, or he came from, I remember they paid this defensive end like $100 million. It was the largest NFL contract for a defensive end. And he was not that. Like, turned out the next year, like, got hurt, just didn't live up to the hype. And it's one of those ones that was like, well, that's why the Lions were the Lions. Yep. They kept paying the wrong guys.
Well, and I think the one that I paid attention to this morning was J.C. Horn. Like the Carolina Panthers paid this guy top DB money. And, I knew who he was, but it's not like it's not the guy that I think, deserves that type of money. And, I mean, it's just another move that Tepper makes that's going to, bury that team.
A move that I did like is Seattle signing Sam Darnold for Baker Mayfield money.
Yeah.
3 years, $100 million, $30 million a year.
And I mean, we talked on the group chat. Like I said, that was his ceiling. And we all were like going back and forth, like after the ceiling, like, would you take that money, after you've been making backup money for the last, 6 seasons, would you take that type of money? And I think Sam made the right deal because, after all, he's going to get, I think 50 some odd is guaranteed, but, could be up to $1 million or 100 million.
What do you, so here's a splashier move that this is like one of the ones where I'm in agreement with, of which I already let you know my opinion on it, the DK Metcalf trade
Mm-hmm.
to Pittsburgh. Me personally, I sit back and you could watch it all season last year. Pittsburgh needed another receiver.
Yes.
It's like if Pickens wasn't catching it, he was fighting a DB. So they needed somebody else. I like the move. The only problem is in Maul, the second I sent the text in the text message, I think it was Maul that was like, problem is who's throwing it to him? Like,
Yeah.
Now I will say, if they get Rodgers, I really like that move for Pittsburgh. They lost Najee Harris. He's gone. He signed a 1-year deal with the Chargers, which I really like.
Mm-hmm.
I like that for the Chargers. It's a good move. What are your opinion on them spending $150 million on Metcalf coming into Pittsburgh?
I mean, I think we're going to see George Pickens and DK fight each other at some point, during this contract.
Somebody's got to get the number 14 this year.
Dude, checks. And like that's the thing too, is like, are they going to be able to work together? Because I mean, I think they're both the same type of personality type guy based on what we see and how many fights that they've had over the years. And that can cause consternation, especially if you got Russ throwing to you, who can't throw the ball to save his life anymore. And it's no harm to, or no ill will towards Russ. He's done. Like he's unable to throw that deep ball, unless it's got a hang time of about 10 seconds, and he just anticipates where they're going to be, so in that regard, the Steelers are going to have to get somebody. And I think they have been making a story out of Aaron Rodgers going there just because of how much he knows Tomlin and how much respect they always give to each other when they play. So it'd be really interesting to see. I personally think that this would be a it just depends on what happens at the quarterback position. Because if they go to Russ, in my opinion, they're in the same exact situation that they were before they traded Deontay Johnson.
I thought of a solution for Pittsburgh that didn't involve Rodgers. I haven't seen this vetted anywhere, but I wanted your take on it. What would you be opposed to giving up a first round pick for Purdy?
Dude, I would. That's a great question. Based on this season's, if it was this season, and I didn't need a gap to be filled with a lineman, or maybe even running back, probably not. But like if I didn't have a dire need that I needed a first round talent, DB, lineman, maybe a linebacker, a edge type player, like if I didn't need to fill that gap, yeah, because the quarterbacks that we have in this year's draft, for Purdy, I would take that because he has proven that he's a game manager. As long as he's got the weapons around him.
Which the Niners are in complete wholesale.
Dude, they got rid of
fire mode.
Yeah, they got rid of Juice. What are y'all doing?
What it looks like they're only going to keep
Purdy.
Purdy,
maybe Kittle,
and C-Mac. The left tackle Williams, and C-Mac. Which C-Mac is, I hate saying this, it's one of those ones where I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Like you really, if he comes out and plays like he's capable of before the injury, that's a solid hit for the Niners. But if he can't stay healthy, it's over. Mm-hmm. Like the Niners are in complete rebuild mode going into the draft because they lost Greenlaw, they lost Charvarius Ward. They've lost some major pieces to their team that, yes, they're going to go out and draft, but they're not doing anything otherwise. I really haven't seen them make any type of signings for free agents. And it makes you wonder, this is the question I posed to you guys last year, was Purdy ceiling what we saw? Because he had all that talent around him, and it's one of those ones where now do you sink really Daniel Jones money into him? and hope that he can uplift all these guys that are now no names around him, or do you trade him and go start at square one?
Yeah.
That's the difficult part for them.
And to come back to it, I wish we had a ability to, well, not all the time, but if we allowed the crowd to see what we talk about behind the closed doors. Like we've already talked about, Purdy only being worth or Baker Mayfield money, and like that's his ceiling. We've already talked about, he's not going to get any better. And honestly, with the 49ers doing the things that they're doing, they're going to sink a whole bunch of money into him, be ready to get rid of him year 2 into his contract. And then they're just going to join the cycle that every other team does, searching for a quarterback because he doesn't have any other players. He doesn't have a surrounding cast. And with C-Mac, is this his third or is he coming off his third season where he's had a career or a season-ending injury?
I know he had one
in Carolina.
With Carolina.
Yeah. He definitely had one where he was out, I think, at least half a season with Carolina as well.
Well, I know when he came from Carolina, it was like he had 4 straight seasons where he hadn't completed or hadn't even played in every game. So it wasn't like an abnormal thing.
Yeah.
For C-Mac to not be on the field. I go back to this like historical take on NFL free agency. Like one of the things I've been looking at is like the Titans. Like, here's a really bad franchise. How bad are they? They have a number 1 overall pick. Yeah. Like, I sit back and look at it and I go, here's a really good like evaluation of why a bad team either stays bad or has the possibility to get good. And it comes down to what they do. Like, they have Will Levis. Is Will Levis bad? I would tend to say yes. Like, he cost them some games last year. Is he, Daniel Jones bad? I don't know. Like, it's one of those ones that for the money that you're paying him, he's not that bad. Mm-hmm. Like, and the reason I say this is you can either do one of two things for Tennessee. You can go get another quarterback, and I would honestly say it's flipping a coin at this point with the guys that are coming out of whether or not they're going to be successes, especially in Tennessee, or you can trade back. Like, I guarantee you the Giants or the Browns would be happy to trade up. Mm-hmm. They want a guy. So it's what we talked about last year with Chicago. Like, what do you want to do? Do you want to take a quarterback that you believe is the guy, but you sort of have some doubts about? Or do you trade back and say, we could get X, Y, and Z for all this other stuff? Now, I look at the Bears. I really like the moves they've made this offseason. Yep. Like, Tooney is a guard. The Bears need a guard. He was not a tackle. Showed up in the Super Bowl. Played for years with the Patriots at guard, Pro Bowl at guard. But when when the Chiefs needed the tackle, they had to move him out. He just wasn't that. Yep. He'll be light years above what the Bears had last year. Now, Jonah from the Rams, he's one that has played at a Pro Bowl level, just been hurt. Yep. So can he overcome that being hurt? If he can, that and the Bears, got rid of their center, but picked up one. Yeah. I sort of sit back and go, what you talked about with Poles. I think they made some good decisions in terms of Tooney is a guy that I would go pay because you got to fix it. Like, hey, we either fix it or the same thing that we saw this year is going to happen next year. Yep. So I like that from that perspective of the Bears. The thing I would have wished the Bears would have done is sign Jonathan out. They let the Vikings get him, which I think helps the Vikings. He's a good player.
100%.
The Bears need that interior defensive lineman. They don't have that right now.
Yeah, and they signed Grady Jarrett from Atlanta. So a little bit older, less money. Yeah.
That was the only thing with the Jarrett move that I didn't like is it would almost be like getting Chris Jones right now. I think he's still capable of playing at a very high level, but not at a snap count that you're wanting. He's not year 2, year 3 type of guy. Now they still got Montez on the line that you're hoping a combination of him and Montez, maybe we get somebody in the draft to help out, makes the difference on the defensive line. The thing I did see the Bears, their forecast of a pick, which I actually really liked, was Warren, the tight end out of Penn State,
Oh, Penn
which
State.
I would like. I think that what the Bears should do, and I don't know if you heard this. I was watching the combine because that's all I do in life is just watch football. I heard something that they were talking about with running backs, and it sort of like perked my ears. They were talking about how, like, you look at how the NFL's changed. Linebackers are not Ray Lewis size anymore. They're a lot smaller because they're expected to cover.
Mm-hmm.
And so now they're like, yo, if you're a heavier back, 240 plus, and you're running around a 4.5, your draft capital's going up. Because if they can find a bigger back to run against a smaller, it's a quicker defense, but it's a smaller defense now. I almost think that we're going to go sort of start tending, like you could see the Bears go back to, let's just run the football. Like if we can, that's what the Eagles did. They found the ability, hey, we can just hand it off to Saquon and win some games. Now in the Super Bowl, it turned out that Jalen won them the game with the ability to throw and run with his legs, and the defense came to play. But that's why I sort of sit back with some of these teams. Like if you're young, dude, build up your offensive line, get a good running back, which the Bears still need.
I mean, I think a lot of that came last year, though, with the offensive line for as far as Swift's struggles. Because Swift out of the backfield still did well. He still caught the ball pretty well and was making plays. Problem is the moment that he tries to go, pound for pound, he's getting nowhere because the offensive line was just hot garbage. So I think this year we'll see better production. Now, I will say, I mean, if they don't trade him, I've seen the speculation of, hey, do you move Swift? Do you keep Swift? What do you do? I would not be upset if the Bears ended up going, the 1-2 punch, like they did with the Lions. You saw the success that Ben Johnson had with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. I'm not saying that Swift is, David Montgomery-esque, but he is, a little bit bigger. And, maybe you get, who knows? Maybe you're able to get Genty and you want to take a chance on a guy like that. Now, my only concern with a guy like Genty is look at the dudes he played in college. He wasn't going every weekend playing against the SEC, putting up these types of numbers. That's the only concern that I have about Genty, is just he was, the fifth grader picking on the kindergartners, in my opinion.
Although when he played in the bowl games, dude, my man has incredible balance.
True.
Like I think for as much as I may not, I hate sort of that compare. Like I get, oh, he didn't play against SEC guys. It's like neither did Khalil Mack. Played at Buffalo, and my man destroyed people in the NFL. Like, the athlete, it's like Bama with 5 stars. It's like you can go recruit a ton of 5 stars. Doesn't mean they're going to make it.
Mm.
Like, just because you played against SEC talent doesn't mean a thing. Like, one of the guys that I hear a lot of negativity about in the NFL draft is James Pierce, the defensive end out of Tennessee. I hear he's got a terrible work ethic, terrible attitude, didn't interview well with teams. And honestly, in the biggest game, that's always like my biggest thing is in the biggest games, did you show up? Like, did I even hear your name? Like, when they played Ohio State, where was James Pierce? Nowhere. Like, my man might as well been on the bench because they got ran right out of that building. Ohio State played unreal, but it was one of those ones that's like, if you're looked at as the number one defensive end, then I sort of expect you to play like the number one defensive end against college talent.
Exactly.
Because when you go to the pros, you're playing one of the best 32 left tackles in the league, every week. So now back to another bad franchise. What do you think about the Colts signing Daniel Jones?
I mean, it's just like what Maul said. Like, if I'm Joe Flacco looking at that, it's like, man, like, I don't. If they have another season like last year, I think Shane Steichen is going to be on the hot seat quick, fast, and in a hurry. Like he came out and he almost got, Gardner Minshew to take him to the playoffs 2 seasons ago. But then this year they look lost, man. For a offensive-minded individual who had a great running back, decent receiver core, and just a struggling quarterback out of AR, and then even Flacco. Flacco had one game, where he looked like vintage, Cleveland Brown coming off the bench, Joe Flacco, to just being mid. It's not that he's mid, it's just he's old. He just did not perform like he did with Cleveland the season prior. And, adding Daniel Jones to the mix, what are you gaining? Besides maybe putting him on a cheap deal, what are you going to get out of Daniel Jones and Anthony Richardson?
I think it shows like the Colts grasping for like air, like they're drowning in the middle of the ocean. This is what happens. Like we sort of called this with Anthony Richardson. It was like, yes, it was this like Mel Kiper type of draft thing that like the intangibles, like, yes, against air, like he's sort of like the Harlem Globetrotters. It's like, yeah, man, the dude threw a football 80 yards, like off his back foot, running away from his throwing arm, like to his left. It's like incredible. And he did that against the Texans this year, like hit an unbelievable play, but it's like he doesn't do it consistently enough that it puts you in a good position to win games. And then, I mean, Pat McAfee called him out when he, hey, I'm going to sub my own self out. It's like, I think about John Elway, diving for the first down in the Super Bowl. And it was like, no, dude, like I am here to win. Like those guys, you'd think about Brady and all these guys that have just gotten the snot beat out of them for years. The Colts drafted the wrong guy. And it's the same
100%.
with like your big free agency splash. Like when you make a bad decision in the draft, dude, it haunts you. Now, the worst thing you can do is do what the Giants did and then pay the dude when it comes time for it. Like the Colts have one decision and they better make it, which is you got to tell Anthony Richardson, sorry, dog, this ain't your time. Like it's not here in Indy. We're not paying you. Can't do it. There's no way.
And I feel like that's their only way, to course correct, in the matter. But then it comes back to, I mean, right now, if you're going to let, Daniel Jones lead the franchise, I think you're mistaken.
I also go back to like the Jonathan Taylor signing. Like, was he a really good back? Yes. But when you invest type of capital into a guy, it hurts you in other regions of the football, especially for them on defense. Like the Colt, there's no difference in my mind really outside of the position of the quarterback of the Colts and the Bengals. Like here's two teams that offensively have talent. But when you look at the defensive side of the ball, you're like, I couldn't name a guy on either defense. And the Bengals are doing the same thing again. Like, dude, they're going to franchise tag T. Higgins. They're going to let Hendrickson walk. And it's like, dude, you guys showed last year that Burrow can throw for 500 yards, 6 touchdowns, and lose. What are you doing, man? Like, it's because you couldn't stop anybody. You got to go get some defensive guys. Like, I hate to break it to you, T. Higgins isn't the answer.
Mm-hmm.
It may sell tickets. It may put up points. It may get you highlights. It may get Joe Burrow an MVP. But if you want to get back to beating the Chiefs, beating the Bills, getting to a Super Bowl, you got to find a defense. Because now you think about their division, Henry and Lamar are going to be right back in the same position they were last year, I think, in the number one seed in their division, if not the number one seed in the AFC. And then you got Pittsburgh, who goes out and gets DK Metcalf, and if they get Aaron Rodgers, you go, dude, Bengals are hurt. Because at least the Steelers have Patrick Queen and TJ Watt. Like, those are the other types of, like, those are the free agency decisions that we, like, never really get into, is when you choose to not pay someone. Like, we started the episode off talking about the splashier signings, but the real, like, splash that hurts is the one that you didn't do.
Yep.
That's just me. Sorry.
No, well, I don't disagree. And this is really going to, I think there's a lot of question marks lingering, for instance, over the Chiefs. Like they're letting guys go. Xavier Worthy's punching out and choking his family members. And I get it. He's going to come back to the team. All charges were dropped. Obviously, it never happened. But What are they going to do? Because last year they showed, Pacheco just was not who we thought he was. I know he battled some injuries, but even when he was there, he wasn't, who we thought he was, compared to prior seasons. And, Kelsey, as he's coming back. But if we have the same exact Kelsey that we had last year, they just don't have it. We've seen how aging their other receiver core is between Juju and D Hop, and man, there's just so many questions surrounding that team that I think your prediction is going to come true of your Chargers knocking off the Chiefs. Based off of what I've been seeing, Mahomes is still going to be Mahomes, and I mean, I don't know if you've seen pictures, but dude's getting ready for war because he knows exactly what we're talking about right now, and he's getting in shape. He's losing that dad bod because he's going to be on the run next year, in my opinion.
The Chiefs will still be very good. That it's the same of having Brady. It's the same of having Peyton. Like when you have your guy at quarterback, you're going to win games. And I think that him with Reed and especially Spag, like, guess what? Yeah, did they get lit up in the Super Bowl? They did. But really, Spag had them 10-0.
Mm-hmm.
You look at the 2 offensive turnovers in the first half, that's what killed the Chiefs. Like in the second half, it just got away from them. Like, second that when they didn't go down the field and score, you could sort of tell the vibe that it was just like, man, I don't think this is our day. And when they hit Devontae Smith, that was just the dagger. The game was over at that point. I sit back and I look at, you take a team like the Chargers. So they give up Josh Palmer, who went to the Bills, which I like for the Bills just because the Bills, it's better than what you had, but at the same time, the Bills really need a number one.
Mm-hmm.
They've got to go find somebody.
Yeah, because Cooper didn't work out.
Yes. He's old. It's the same thing with the Chiefs. Like, Chiefs go out and sign D Hop, and D Hop 5 years ago would have been like Tyreek on the team.
Mm-hmm.
Total game changer. But like, he showed his age in the Super Bowl. Like, it wasn't the same guy that we were accustomed to in Arizona or in Houston in the early parts. I sit back and look at the Chargers. That's their biggest question going into the offseason. It's like, you got to find a wide receiver. You have to find an ability to go get some guys because, I mean, homeboy can't catch.
Yeah.
Johnston cannot catch. You have Ladd, who's great.
Yeah, and Ladd can't do it all.
Correct. And so I like it. It's why the Chargers ran the ball so much. It's why that's what they did. It's because they knew offensively when we got to throw, that's not where we win. Mm-hmm. We don't have the weapons to win. So I'll be very interested to see like how the Chargers attack, since they haven't made any really free agent signings of note on outside of Najee Harris at running back. On the wide receiver standpoint, that's what I envision them drafting. Like, you got to go find that solution somewhere for them. Same with sort of the Ravens. Like, you got Zay Flowers. They need another guy. You need another guy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Philly has A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. And even Johan Dotson showed up for him. Like, caught that pass on the first drive down the sideline. It was on the episode me and Maul were talking about. It was great because it turned out to be true. It was like they didn't need Dotson to be a number 1 or number 2. They just needed him to beat the third best corner on the team that they played against, and he did it. Like, That's what you need. That's like, you're finding like the small holes to fill. And for the Chargers, you take a look at them. You take a look at the Raiders. The Raiders, I sit back and I go, the Raiders are at a bad spot. Like, the Geno Smith,
it was a reach
at best. Like, I really thought that they should have went and got Darnold instead of Geno. The only reason I can sit back and say that they didn't go get Darnold is just because
Pete Carroll knows Geno.
Yes. Well, he knows Darnold from college, but he's more familiar with Geno here as of late. So that's who they went and got. But don't get me wrong, they still have Brock Bowers and they have Jacoby Myers, and they spent all that money on Max Crosby. You're now in this balance of, I got to build the rest of the team while having a fill in at quarterback. Why? Because it's a money thing. Like, that's where they're at.
Yep.
I hope they don't take either one of the quarterbacks, because if they take Ward or Shador Sanders, the Raiders ain't winning. Like, which I don't know. Do you see that whole thing about Shador not having great interviews?
Yeah, just I mean, I think he's just the Dion effect. You know, like, and the thing about it is, you can't be surprised. I mean, it's who we've seen on every single interview. So the fact that now they're surprised by how he interviewed, like, come on, there's plenty of shows on TV right now that you can look and be like, this interview can go one or two ways. And, you know, just everything that's been coming out is that he just has that his dad's mentality, you know, that approach to life with that chip on his shoulder.
I still remember there was one of the. It's a tremendous docu-series. Every year they put one out. It's called America's Game. It's each of the Super Bowls, like, winners that whole season they'll go through, and they'll usually like have either a player, few players, or coach that will just sort of narrate the season as they go through it and talk about it. When the Niners with Steve Young won the Super Bowl, they were talking about the day of the Super Bowl, like Dion pulled up like with a camera crew inside this Lamborghini, and Jerry Rice lit into him in the locker room. Was like, this, we ain't here for that. We are here to win a Super. And Dion was like, no, this prime time. Now they ended up winning. They killed the Chargers, but it was one of these ones where Young talked about it. He's like, dude, at the end of that season, that team was splitting apart because there was the tried and true Joe Montana's Jerry Rice way of winning. Like, we are focused. Like, Jerry was, there's a reason that when you look at NFL records, my man's untouchable. No one will ever repeat what he did.
Yeah.
Ever. Period. Dot. Him and Dion were not going to get along. Like, I think one of my favorite stories about Jerry is that 2 days after that Super Bowl, Steve Young, at the end of that series, they were talking about how just the mystique of Rice. He's like, I remember I came in. He's like, there's no one at the facility. He's like, I was coming in to clean out my locker. He's like, when you're walking to the locker room, you walk past these bay windows that overlook the practice field. He's like, I'm walking and sort of looking. He's like, I do this like triple take. He's like, there's Jerry Rice running gassers 2 days after. He goes, that's what made Jerry. Like, that's why Jerry Rice was who he was. And I think that's what, like, we don't ever really get to talk about this in terms of draft, because you don't ever get to see it and hear it. You get to hear the rumors about it, but it's like, I think that's what teams are really trying to find out when they interview a guy. It's like they know, and Saban always said this when guys would call him and ask about, he's like, they didn't ask how fast he was or any of like his intangibles. They wanted to know who the person was. Like, they wanted to find out, like, when it comes time to get paid to work, that when times get tough, like, is this the guy that's going to be like Tom Brady? Like, I believe eating strawberries affects my ability to play football, so I'm not going to eat a strawberry. It's like, you have that end of the spectrum, and then you have, like, I remember the Giants on that boat before the playoff game, that it was like, it's just two completely different, separate mindsets, that you have extreme talent in both scenarios. One is like, I'm going to perfect my talent, and the other one's like, I'm just going to let it speak for itself, and if it works out, it works out.
Yep.
Like,
yeah, I mean, it's like I'd say the other end of the spectrum would be the Jamarcus Russell effect. You know, number one draft, and then, you know, you're not even paying attention in film. You don't know, you know, what the coverage is. You know, just like all those things that came out, you know, about the guys. Like, you feel like you probably could have found that out doing a little research before you drafted the guy.
Well, two other guys that I sit back and think about, it was on, I think it was a Football Life that did it. It was talking about the Rose Bowl with Leinart and Vince Young, and both of those guys said that they came into the league. Like, I expected to hear Vince Young say it, and he said it. He was like, I was more concerned with like promoting my own brand. And Leinart said that he just didn't study. He was like, I just thought that I had it. You know, we had all the success at USC, and I didn't put the time in to like being great. And by the time I realized it, it was over.
Yeah.
It's too late. Like, you can't make it up. my dad always goes back to that Ryan Leaf, Peyton Manning. They were like, "Hey Ryan, what are you doing?" He's like, "I'm gonna go party," and they're like, "What are you doing, Peyton?" He's like, "I'm flying to Indy to get the playbook."
Mm-hmm.
Like, and those two draft, interviews perfectly predicted their careers.
Yep. That's
So
fact.
now I'll ask you, since we talked about in text, I'll ask you it that way we can expound upon it. Were you disappointed with Myles Garrett signing back with the Browns?
We talked about this, and my answer initially is yeah, I was. It came back to, and you can expound on what Maul said, but like for me personally, I was just like, you sat there, you've been unhappy for all these seasons, saying that you want to go play for a contender, but then you were able to be bought out with more money. And there's two pieces of that. It's like, well, maybe he's just a loyal guy. And it's like, well, not quite, because he's said multiple times he wants to go play for a contender. He wants to be taken seriously, and not have his prime wasted. I think, was it last year that he posted on his Twitter, thank you. And, but I just want to go play for a contender. And then he came back, so he's made those ploys that he wants. Maybe it's a cry for help for the organization to finally go do something, but it just hasn't worked out, So in my opinion, um, I think he took the money because he saw the zeros and commas versus taking a cut and going to go play for a contender.
Which it comes down to, would the Browns be willing to trade him, and would someone else be willing to trade for him and give up what the Browns were wanting?
Exactly.
That's the difficult part that you don't know, because it's one of those ones where the GM could easily sit down and be like, "We're fully ready for you to sit. Like, under no circumstance are we going to trade you. So we're going to pay you royalty, knowing that we're going to be terrible." He didn't say that in the interview, I guarantee. But Maul's point was, you can either take $100 million and be miserable, or you can take a cut and compete for a Super Bowl. He made his decision.
Exactly.
Like, it
And,
sucks.
and that's one of those things. It's, you've got the loyalty piece. Some guys, honestly, there are the traditionalists out there. Is like, hey, this is the organization that drafted me. This is the organization that's rolled out the red carpet, done everything to try to succeed, and it just wasn't my time. There's some guys that are like that, but as we've seen this game, I mean, across all spectrum of sports, it's become such a business that I feel like that loyalty piece just isn't quite there anymore the way that it used to be. Like look how many different teams LeBron's played for, chasing the moolah. I mean, he did go back to Cleveland. He got them a championship, so respect to that. But all that I'm trying to use as that example is that the loyalty piece is just not there like it was, a couple decades ago.
It goes both ways. I sit back,
Yeah.
as much as I know we've hated on Rodgers here lately, there was no doubt that for a period of probably like 5 to 6 years, my man was playing at the most elite of the
Peak
quarterback
level.
position.
Peak. Yes.
And what did they do? They never helped the man.
Yep.
Like, he made Devontae Adams. Don't get me wrong, Devontae was an extraordinarily good player, but it was like he made guys in the third and fourth round into superstars at that position. When you look back and you're like, dude, what if they had drafted, X, Y, or Z? Like, they had abilities to go draft wide receivers in the first round that went on to be really good in the league, and they let him walk for a corner who we couldn't even tell you what his name is anymore. Like, that, it goes both ways. Like, I understand the frustration of Rodgers, and it's one of those ones where it's like, I get it. By the time he was it reminded me so much of Favre. Like, because Favre was so good during that period, but it's like consistently they wouldn't go out and get, like, I remember when the Patriots signed Randy, Favre was like furious because he was like, I have been begging you guys to go get this guy. Like, this is the guy I want to play for. And if you had put Moss with Favre, you saw what he did with Brady. Like, I think that you would have saw the similar result. Like, it was a truly good team. Favre still had, gas in the tank left. It's one of those ones that, as a big franchise, like, I respect what the Chiefs did. The Chiefs knew they lost Tyreek. They knew they were getting a little older. So what did they go do? They traded for D-Hop. They got Hollywood. They traded up with the Bills to get Worthy. They're going to get Rice back next year. Like, they have pieces. I expect the Bills, or not the Bills, the Chiefs to do something at the end of the first round. Like, that's the sort of benefit of when you have it's the difference between them and the Steelers is the Chiefs have a quarterback. Like, that's it. They're both like extremely well coached. They're going to be in the playoffs every year. The difference is like the Steelers are always in that position. They can't take a quarterback, so they could always go take like someone else that's good. They can go find a guard. They can go find a tackle, a corner. They're able to secure something that makes their team better, and that's what the Chiefs do every year. The difference is when it comes time to play, the Chiefs have a quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's the only difference. So the difference with the Bills is that the Bills tend to give up their pick to the Chiefs, who then use that pick to beat them in the playoffs. Like,
every year.
Yeah. Every year. Like, that's what drives me insane with some of those teams is it's like you're willing to slide back in the draft with a team that it's like you're competing with every year. And it's one of those ones where it's like, I hope that you've learned your lesson, because twice now it's happened. Once was for Mahomes and the other was for Xavier Worthy. Can you stop giving the Chiefs your pick?
Exactly.
Like, you got to figure that one out. So, that's a big thing. little NFL rant. What else you got?
Honestly, like, I think overall, I think you kind of alluded to it. My biggest question mark outside of the Chiefs is, how are the Ravens going to fix their defense, going into this offseason? Because we saw the difference, without Patrick Queen being there with Roquan Smith. Like, Roquan had to cover a lot of ground that he was not having to do, so much with Patrick Queen. Because we saw that secondary too. Just, I mean, they were getting torched, and so it comes down to, the Bills just paid Allen. They got rid of Von Miller. We've known that they've had an issue on the defensive side too. It's like, what are those two teams going to do because again, even though the Chiefs had their struggles and they lost the Super Bowl, they still made it to the Super Bowl. They were the number one team in the AFC and are still at the top of the pedestal to get knocked off. So it's like, what are these contenders going to do to be able to knock them off in the upcoming season? For me, with the Ravens, I would say outside of wide receiver as well, question mark is tight end. Mark Andrews was pretty much non-existent, to include dropping that crucial. I can't remember. It was definitely fourth down, but like he could have scored.
2-point conversion.
Yeah, that's what. The 2-point conversion. Yeah, and so Isaiah Likely was there some games, but wasn't there other games. Like that, they have a receiving core that needs to be rebuilt as well. To help out Lamar and Derrick Henry. And then
the Ravens and the Bills have the same problem, in my opinion.
I agree.
It's defensive end.
Yeah.
Like, when you can get after the quarterback, dude, it just changes games. Like, it makes your corners better. It makes everybody look better. Like, it's why the Eagles won the game. It's because they got after Mahomes the whole game. Like, it makes everyone around you play better when you can get pressure on the quarterback. But the Ravens couldn't do it, and that's why that secondary got lit up. It's why the Bills got lit up. Now, don't get me wrong. As much as like a great story it is, DeMar Hamlin isn't that guy at corner or at safety. Like, he's just not that. But yeah, I'm in the same boat. Like, I agree with Likely and Andrews. It's one of those ones where maybe it's time to free up some cap space and not pay Andrews.
Mm-hmm.
Sucks. It's one of those business decisions. It goes both ways. Like, I see it same with, Kelsey and the Chiefs. I think the smart move, I get it. It's to move on. Now it's the last dance for them. They're going to come out and try to win it, and Kelsey's going to retire, and it will free up that cap space. But at the end of the day, you're putting all your eggs now into this basket, because I think at the end of the year, Kelsey's for sure gone, maybe Reed, and then we're now going to find out what Mahomes truly can do without those other pieces around him, because the organization before Reed and Mahomes showed up, outside of Super Bowl III, terrible.
Yeah.
The Chiefs have been bad for a long time.
Yeah, besides a couple of years of, Trent Green and Priest Holmes, and a little bit of Jamal Charles, like they've been absolutely nothing, for a long time. A little Derek Brooks action.
It's like they had Tony Gonzalez for years, but
Yeah.
just could never win.
Yep.
So I agree with you. It's a unique thing, and then you got the Eagles. It's like the Eagles have an offense. They have it. I would argue probably the best offensive line in the country. Now, I don't know if you saw they traded C.J. Gardner to the Texans for a guard, which I thought was interesting, just because the Eagles' line is pretty good. I think they are really just the Texans needed to give up somebody, which the Texans, I'm looking at them. It's like I don't get why you traded Tunsil
That didn't make sense.
to the Commanders. Like one of the better left tackles. The only thing that I can imagine is that you're sitting back and you're like, we got to pay Stroud eventually. We got to free up some cap space. That's the only thing in my mind that comes to light. But it's one of those ones that we found out in the past that when you get rid of good offensive linemen, if you don't figure that out, the quarterback's going to pay the price for it the following year.
Exactly.
So, and they went out and got Christian Kirk, which I think is a signal that Stephon Diggs is not going to be there next year.
Yeah.
So, but Kirk's coming off a season-ending injury. We'll see.
Yeah, the Jaguars are getting rid of everybody but T-Law because they're stuck.
You can't.
Yeah, exactly, because you're stuck. I am honestly surprised that this year how many big names have been moving around. I turn my phone back on off of airplane mode, and it seems like you're sending a new big name that's been traded, and you're just like, my goodness, I feel like there's a lot more prolific players in my opinion this season than in years past, and I think that speaks volumes as well to what's coming in the draft. Like seeing all these quarterbacks move now, these teams, I think they already know, hey, we're going to go get Cam Ward, but Cam Ward's been in college for 6 years, and still, yeah, he was in the Heisman talk, or, in the final voting this past year. But dude, like this guy was, he had 6 years to try to figure it out, and then Shador, I think we've all kind of, I hate to say it, but I feel if this was his last name was not Sanders, in my personal opinion, we would not be talking about Shador the way that we do. And I mean, it's already been highlighted that people don't think he's a first round talent. Does he get drafted? Sure. But I don't think it's the, it's name recognition, in my opinion, as far as that goes.
Did they make Colorado better? Yeah.
Yeah.
But did they beat talent when it came to, they couldn't beat a top 25 team?
No.
They never did. Like it was one of those ones where this is like where I go back to it of like, did they beat TCU to open up the season 2 seasons ago? Yes. But then what happened? We were like,
TCU was terrible.
Trash.
Yeah.
Like,
well, and that was the other piece too, is like you watched any Colorado game, you're like, Shador, I can pause the TV and point 3 times you could have let go of that ball. Instead, you're taking a sack because you're worried about your own stats. Like, in my opinion, I thought he was a stat patter. If you want my honest opinion, like that completion percentage was always near 80% because he sat there and waited until he knew he had to throw.
I think the other reason anytime you see a lot of movement in free agency is because teams look at a draft and they go, there's not a lot of guys that we think are going to have an immediate impact. Like,
yep.
That's what I thought from the Steelers. Like, why'd you go get Metcalf? That's the Steelers saying there's no one in this draft that we think is going to have the ability to make that type of impact for us immediately at the position of wide receiver, so we got to go get it. Mm-hmm. Like, that's why the Steelers made the move that they did. That's why other teams are making the moves I think they are doing, because they sit back and they go, it's not going to be there. The Browns are going to do what the Browns are going to do. Same with the Giants. Like, Cam Ward and Shador, in my opinion, are going to one of those two teams. I don't really think. I think the Titans are going to trade back. I think they either trade back or they take the defensive end Carter from Penn State. Like, that's just sort of where my gut is telling me on that. I could be wrong, but it makes more sense for the Titans to trade back. Like, you could go get Cleveland, the number 2 pick. You could take anyone at the number 2 because no one cares. Like, I hate saying that, but it's not the number 1. If you're not taking the position of quarterback at number 1, it's probably best, unless you know that you just got an absolute home run hitter, to trade back.
Yeah. And that's the thing going into this draft. I think we're going to see, the moment that Aaron Rodgers finally signs with the team, I think we will start to get a better understanding of where, a team like Tennessee is going to be leaning going into the draft. Because I've even seen his name tossed in the hat going to Tennessee, which honestly, he's got Calvin Ridley. They've got Tony Pollard, who needs a little bit of a restart after, the lack of production he put up last season. But I don't know. I think
3 of the bigger free agent quarterbacks are still there.
Yeah.
You got Rodgers,
Kirk Cousins,
Russell Wilson. Like, where do you think those 3 guys go?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the Browns just got Kenny Pickett. So, I mean, obviously.
He's got a Super Bowl.
Dude, yeah, when I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, Kenny Glove Hands. Because everybody said that Kirk was going to go to the Browns. They thought that's where he was heading. But it's like, you're still caught in Deshaun Watson. You cannot take on a contract like Kirk unless Atlanta is willing to continue to pay for it. He's in year 2, of a 4-year deal. I think Atlanta's stuck, in my opinion. Or did they release him? Sorry, I haven't been too fresh.
They have not released him yet. I know he went and talked to management that he wanted to go to a playoff team.
Correct, yeah.
But the management was pretty much like, we're going to do what's best for the team, which I think that if they can't find a trade partner, which they're not going to, they're going to cut him.
Yeah, because nobody wants to pay that money, let's be honest.
Correct.
And Atlanta is already saying, hey, we're not going to foot the bill either. No. So, outside of that, man, Russell, I just don't see it. I mean, the fact that the Jets would rather have Justin Fields, than Russell, like, I don't think that there's much of an option left for him, in my opinion. It might just be time to hang up the cleats.
Yeah. If I think his only option right now is the Steelers. If the Steelers don't bring him back, what do you do? Like, the Saints? Like,
yeah, and they've already committed to Derek Carr.
Yeah. I don't know where you go in the NFL, because most outside of like the Giants, it's not a good situation.
Well, and the Red Rocket came back, so he can't go to Carolina as a backup, so.
Well, that's everything I got. You got anything else?
No, man, it's been good. I think, leading up to these last couple of big name signings, we'll get a good opportunity to come around in the next couple of weeks for our draft guesstimation. Because, I mean, we hit a couple pretty well on the head last year. So maybe we know a little bit more than people think.
We knew better than taking a quarterback with Atlanta.
Dude, if only we can make a couple million to be doing this, unlike those talking heads on ESPN.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in. Like Pop said, we'll get back to you in a few weeks with the NFL draft episode. But until then, time to pull chalks. We'll see you guys next time.